Welcome everyone to the video. Welcome to the channel. We're going to jump right into this. So if you're enjoying this content, please like the video by hitting the thumbs up, subscribe down below if you want to continue to see content like this, but let's just jump straight into this video here. Cause I have a lot, I wrote down a lot. Why does the world feel biblical right now is what I'm currently titling this one. Um, because everywhere you look right now, it feels like the world is falling apart. We all know about the wars that are occurring and economic instability. I just heard of a bunch of, layoffs occurring, virus outbreaks, that cruise ship right now, natural disasters. And for a lot of people, it's starting and genuinely feeling biblical. Like we're living through Revelation itself. You open your phone and what is it? Another war or another update on the war. An outbreak is occurring. The headline is another headline telling you civilization's on edge. And I think a lot of people are quietly asking themselves, the same exact question. Why does everything suddenly feel so different? But, I'm going to approach this conversation from a little bit of a different angle because maybe the world is not necessarily becoming more chaotic uh, than it has been throughout history. Maybe this is the first time humanity can actually see everything happening at once, and maybe the human mind just was never designed for that. You know, Humanity now lives inside a constant global information. Think about this. Right now, a war can break out somewhere on the planet, and within seconds, you're watching the footage, and right on your phone. Yeah, you're sitting in your kitchen, your living room, you're at work. That's really, really crazy when you think about it. For most of human history, people only knew what happened within a relatively small area around them. The world or your world was your town. Maybe it was your church, your village, just your local community. Maybe, remember when information traveled by just newspaper, and then what was it before that? Then with radio, there was always a delay. It was distance, there was filtering as well too. Now there's not really that. Today, humanity experiences the entire planet emotionally in real time. And I don't think our brains really evolved for that. The human brain evolved for survival in small groups, not for absorbing, wars, pandemic, economic collapse, uh, a recession, all this political propaganda, you know, the we're not designed to have this every single hour of every single day. We're consuming planetary anxiety just nonstop. And because of that, the world psychologically feels far more unstable than it may have felt to previous generations. This is important because every generation, eventually believes they're living near the end. Think about the people who lived during, World War One or two, the Spanish flu or the Great Depression. What about during the Cold War when any, nuclear bomb fears that occurred during that time? Terrorist attacks. Imagine being around during the time of the Cuban Missile Crisis. People thought nuclear war could happen at any moment. Imagine being alive during the Black Plague when populations were being wiped out. Imagine watching, Europe collapse during the world wars. Just your whole city being destroyed. Those generations absolutely believed the world was unraveling at that time. The difference is they did not carry the entire planet in their pockets. We are not, they were not bombarded with catastrophe every waking moment. Their nervous systems had space to breathe. Today, there's no breathing room. The second something happens globally, it becomes psychological content instantly. And it spreads to billions of people within minutes. Um, I honestly believe the internet fundamentally changed human consciousness, not just communication, but consciousness itself. Because for the first time in history, humanity became mentally connected at a planetary scale. And when nobody nobody really understands what that does psychologically long term. Every fear, rumor, pandemic is spreads instantly now. Any conspiracy, any type of outbreak is instantly spread. Human beings are now emotionally synchronized through information. That's never existed before. And I think people truly underestimate how massive that is. You are no longer, carrying your personal stress. You're carrying global stress, maybe economic stress, political stress, social stress. Of course, there's always been, well, not well, religious stress all at once, and your brain is constantly scanning for danger because the internet constantly feeds it danger, and over time, that changes your perception of the reality itself. This is where things really get interesting because once fear becomes, constant, people will naturally begin interpreting the world through apocalyptic frameworks, especially religious ones. Wars, disease, economic instability. Those are themes deeply embedded in religious prophecy and scripture. So when modern people see nonstop footage of global instability, it naturally triggers those associations, especially for people raised around Christianity. And I think social media just amplifies it, you know, dramatically because fear spreads faster than calm. Fear keeps the attention, and attention nowadays is profitable. That means modern algorithms will naturally push the panic, the outrage, the disaster, because emotional reactions generate engagement. A calm headline does not spread like a terrifying one. Think about how many videos online right now basically are telling you the world is ending. How many things have you seen already about the virus and the virus that's on the cruise ship? You know, why? Because fear performs. Fear keeps people watching. And once people stay in that cycle long enough, the world generally starts feeling apocalyptic psychologically. Now, here's another layer to this. Previous generations, lived under far heavier information control. It was handled. Only a handful of institutions controlled most communication. TV, radio, newspapers. The government. Information moved slower than a lot slower than it does now. Narratives were more centralized. Now the system is fractured completely. Anybody can upload footage instantly. Anybody can broadcast globally, exposing corruption, spread panic. And while that created more freedom, it also created information overload. And you know, humanity escaped centralized information control only to enter decentralized chaos. Now people do not know, what is true, what is manipulated, what is the propaganda, what is AI, what is not AI, what is genuine danger, and what is not. And uncertainty creates anxiety. Uncertainty itself makes the world feel unstable. You know, this may sound harsh, but I think modern society became addicted to crisis psychology. People wake up and immediately check their headlines. You check, the stock market, the latest news, politics. Yeah, you're immediately hit with like, oh, the new outbreak is happening here. The nervous system gets conditioned into constant alert mode, and social media just reinforces this behavior endlessly. You scroll because you want certainty, but instead you absorb more uncertainty over and over again. And eventually people stop feeling peace entirely. They begin, expecting catastrophe. That becomes their normal mental state. I honestly think millions of people today are psychologically exhausted and they don't even fully realize why because they're absorbing the emotional weight of the entire world every single day. I mean, look what happens, anytime there's a kind of an outbreak, a virus outbreak, immediately Boom, global news. People start posting, here we go again, the next pandemic. Fear starts spreading. Years ago, smaller outbreaks happened constantly around the world, and most people never even heard about them. That doesn't mean, modern concerns are fake. It means that visibility changed everything, and visibility changes perception. The more danger you see, the more dangerous reality feels. Even if statistically life in some ways may actually be a lot more safer than previous centuries, the human brain responds emotionally to exposure, not just not just statistics. I mean, and today's exposure is infinite. I truly believe this. Human beings were never designed to process infinite information. You know, like I said, we evolved for small tribes, small communities, direct survival, physical threats, not digital planetary awareness. Your ancestors did not wake up consuming wars from three different continents, economic collapse predictions, political outrage, disease outbreaks. Um, and, today we do it daily between as soon as we wake up and maybe in the middle of the day as well too. And maybe before we go to bed. And I think modern anxiety is partially the result of humans living beyond the psychological limits our brains are evolved for. We built technology faster than we evolved emotionally. That gap is becoming very dangerous. Let me just quickly be clear that I'm not mocking religion or prophecy or faith, not at all. Because throughout uncertain periods, humanity naturally searches for meaning. And honestly, I understand why many people feel the way they do right now. The world does feel different. There is tension everywhere, instability, division. But maybe the reason it feels so overwhelming is because humanity can finally see itself clearly at a global level. For the first time in history, we are collectively witnessing human conflict, the corruption, fear, and instability in real time. Maybe revelation did not suddenly appear. Maybe the curtain, that separated humanity from global awareness finally is disappearing, and that really, really changes everything, psychologically. You know, this is the darker part. Once fear, captures attention, fear becomes profitable. Media, politics, social media, corporations, they all profit from it. Fear keeps people engaged. A frightened population watches constantly whenever there's the war breaking out. Right, you're yeah, right now. I'm looking up stuff on this virus that's occurring. It's getting clicks. It's getting people to consume it. The algorithm learns this very, very quickly. That means modern systems naturally reward emotional, destabilizing information. Not necessarily because there's some big conspiracy controlling everything, but because fear performs better, economically. And once you understand that, you begin realizing why the modern internet just feels so emotionally heavy all the time. Now, I think one of the biggest losses in modern society is just simple peace itself. Silence, stillness. People are constantly connected, stimulated, and consuming. Without realizing it, many people slowly lose the ability to just mentally disconnect. You know, there's always another notification, you know, big crisis or, another outrage cycle. And over time, people begin carrying permanent anxiety. That's not healthy. Human beings need psychological rest, but modern systems are not designed for rest. They're designed for engagement. So why does the world feel biblical right now? Maybe because for the first time, humanity can witness global instability collectively and instantly. Maybe because fear spreads faster than truth online. Maybe because modern technology has amplified human anxiety to a planetary scale. Maybe it's because we're overloaded psychologically. Or maybe uncertainty, naturally pushes humanity towards deeper spiritual questions. It's probably all the above. But one thing I do believe is this is that human beings were never meant to absorb, the emotional weight of this entire world every waking second of our lives. And if you constantly consume fear, eventually reality itself begins feeling apocalyptic. Not because the world is suddenly became chaotic overnight, but because chaos is now live streamed directly into human consciousness, and it could be 24 hours a day if you let it. And maybe that is one of the biggest transformations humanity has ever experienced. Not just technological evolution, psychological evolution. And honestly, I don't think we fully and completely understand what it's doing to us. That's the end of the video. Bit of a longer one than normal. I just had a lot to say on this, and the everything was just flowing as I was creating this video. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this content, please, subscribe, and you'll, get to do the notification bell if you like to get the instant. Well, I guess after watching this, maybe don't do the notification bell. Watch when you are still or calm. Uh, but this may help you, help. I hope it helps. Thanks for watching and see you in the next one.